It's official. Joe Ingles has a torn ACL. What will the Jazz do to fill his minutes, or was he the glue that held this together? And it's time for a bigger move. A Joe Ingles appreciation thread, and we get back to playing. Do they have anyone we want with Dallas, Denver, and Golden State? It's all coming up on today's edition of Locked on Jazz. Bum 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 pow.
You are Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA Insider. This is Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thanks very much for making Locked on Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, where you can subscribe on that button right there. Hit the bell and be notified anytime that we get going. So it's official. Joe Ingles, torn ACL, out for the season. Possibility he's played his very final game as a member of the Utah Jazz. Possibility, I guess, he's played his final game in the NBA. I do, on that note, just quickly with pure speculation, I do feel like if he's going to decide to rehab and come back, the market at 34 years old will be limited. And I think that it is, that's where actually there's a chance he returns to the Utah Jazz, is that, you know, he doesn't want to move and he's going to go through rehab. And he's going to go through rehab where he's comfortable. There is also a real chance at 34 years old, he starts the rehab and decides, I got a wife, 3 kids. Melbourne, Australia is awesome. And I'm going to head back and wrap up what's been an awesome career in one city where I will always be beloved. And we will see that on today's show. We will look at a Joe Ingles appreciation thread that yesterday on the internet. We will play the trade game that we have been playing. And but let's dig into how the Jazz replace Joe Ingles with how the roster stands right now. The really big question that has to be addressed by the Jazz was, is Joe Ingles the glue to this team? And are we overstating it due to the moment? Obviously, Rudy and Donovan are what make the team go. But is there something where Joe was the glue? The Jazz had plenty of opportunities to trade Joe Ingles. We frankly have plenty of opportunities to trade everyone. That's kind of a silly comment, but go with it. The Jazz had plenty of opportunities to trade Joe Ingles and didn't. And the reason I think they didn't is when they started to imagine the team without him, the pieces just didn't quite fit anymore without Joe. Jordan Clarkson fits with Joe. Like, as we've talked about this year, that, you know, Jordan's high volume, not that efficient, kind of works as long as Joe's wildly efficient. He doesn't need a lot of possessions. And now, you don't have Joe. Royce O'Neal, the defensive presence, the lack of shooting, but the good shooting works as long as you have the ball mover Joe and some things like that. So there's some pieces to this puzzle. The second ball handler on the floor for the Jazz was always kind of a vital piece to the puzzle, that they could run an initial pick and roll, swing to Joe, and then he comes through. And whenever they had moments where they had to think about not having that, it prevented them from ever making the trade, because there was no desire to live without that. Now they must live without it. So how do they do it? The first part of it is just, what do you do with his minutes? As I said yesterday, I think Rudy Gay is the key player here, but honestly, Rudy Gay hasn't looked great recently, coming off a significant foot injury. He just has not, and being on a new team, he just has not found his grasp of what's going on yet. Now, he's also playing 20 minutes. He was playing 22. 3 years ago, he played 27. Does he somehow start by playing more? Does he somehow, click in a little bit more? But I don't know that he can guard the 3. If you're going to play him in Joe Ingles minutes, that's really the three. Joe wasn't seemingly guarding the three great either. But we'll see. Joe, Rudy Gay in the month of January, 38% shooting, 30% from three. He's been sub 30% from three since December 1. It's a big drop from Joe, who's been traditionally a 40% three-point shooter. And Rudy Gay's not going to be able to play with the ball in his hands the same way. He's not as good a shooter, frankly. The other choice is Daniel House. You would probably get better defensively, but House is not that same level shooter, understanding that we do have Joe coming off a difficult month where he shot 40% and 30% from three. House is a career 36% three-point shooter. In his heyday, he did play 30 minutes a night and start 52 games on that James Harden Rockets team. He averaged 10 points a game, so he's not going to suddenly go grab a bunch of possessions. Can he be? Joe actually was less and less of a corner three shooter. He was more of an off-the-bounce shooter at the top. That is not something you're going to see out of Eddie House. Out of Daniel House. House is a 35% corner three shooter, not the Happy Valley right corner. So these are drop-offs. The next question to me is whether you just rebuild the rotation. The rotation has been built in a manner that had you either had Donovan or Mike. First of all, we match Mike and Rudy, and then you play the other lineups where Joe plays a lot of minutes when he's not starting. If you look at the lineups Joe played the most with, one of them's that bridge lineup. We talked about this yesterday. That's a massive blow to the Jazz. That's his number one lineup he played with: Mike Conley, Jordan Clarkson, Joe Ingles, Rudy Gay, Rudy Gobert. That lineup probably now has Eric Paschall in it instead of Joe Ingles. It's just a very different grouping. Maybe it's Daniel House in that grouping with Rudy Gay. We were plus 18 in those minutes. The second most common lineup Joe played with was with Donovan in the bench unit with Hassan and Bogey and Royce. And it allowed Donovan to have a second ball handler on the floor with him. That lineup was actually about even, but really because they just didn't defend at all. And particularly they didn't defensive rebound. The next lineup he played the most with was that same as that first unit that we talked about, but it was with Eric Paschall instead of Rudy Gay. It's actually 22.2, not 18.5. But that's the real killer. It's that stretch, the bridge lineup from the end of the first to the end of the second has been the key to the Jazz for the last few years when Rudy and Mike come back in their middle stint. Do you still do that? Is that still the answer? The other one is obviously when Joe started in place of Donovan, that grouping was a 1.7. And then the last one was when he played in that same bench grouping of Royce O'Neal, Donovan Mitchell, Bojan Bogdanovic, but he did it with Rudy Gobert instead of Hassan Whiteside, and they were plus 13 instead of plus 1. And then there's some other iterations of that. The last one probably being when he played with Donovan, Jordan, Rudy Gay, and Hassan Whiteside for a little bit. That lineup didn't work. So now you start to dig into our lineups. You take Joe Ingles off the floor. Let's take Joe Ingles and Donovan Mitchell off the floor, Mike Conley on the floor. Okay, that's going to be now one of the concepts is that Mike Conley has to be on the floor without either Joe Ingles or Donovan Mitchell playing point guard by himself. It only happened for 259 possessions this year. We're minus 10. Now, if you add, the question then is, this is also where, Mike plays with Rudy Gobert, usually with Joe Ingles. And he's only played 55 possessions all year with Rudy Gobert, Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert, and no Joe Ingles and no Donovan Mitchell. And in those very limited moments, we're minus 14. So you start to try to put this together. So Mike Conley without either Joe Ingles or Donovan Mitchell. So in other words, Mike Conley without a second ball handler on the floor. The offense is in the 47th percentile. The defense is in the 4th percentile. It's really been pretty poor. Most of that time, though, is with somebody other than Rudy Gobert. Those are the few minutes Mike's plays without Rudy. Let's go to Donovan. Now, without Mike Conley or Joe Ingles on the floor, because that's going to be now what Donovan has to do. He has to play the point guard in a manner, and the answer is we're minus 1.0. So now we're suddenly confronted with our two primary lineups being negative. Now, again, with Rudy Gobert somehow usually changes this. But Donovan hasn't played a lot of Rudy Gobert minutes without Mike Conley on the floor. They're usually Hassan Whiteside minutes. That's what Donovan has. Donovan's played 197 minutes with Rudy Gobert and not Mike Conley. We're plus 19 in those 197 possessions. So that's not we aren't too worried about that. But Donovan with Hassan without another ball handler, which is usually what he's doing, is plus 3.1. We don't have a lot of time there for Donovan without Joe and without Mike, but it's his most common is, and we're going to see it now, is Donovan Mitchell, Jordan Clarkson, Royce O'Neal, Bojan Bogdanovic, Hassan Whiteside, no secondary ball handler. And then the offense is a -5, or the team is a -5, predominantly because it struggles defensively. But those are the matches. And so the question you have to start asking yourself is Joe the glue? And if Joe's the glue, what happens here? So we'll take a look at what some of those options are. We'll look at in addition, we'll take a look at the Joe Ingles appreciation thread, which was pretty awesome, and get everyone's favorite memories of Joe on and off the floor today as well. As the Jazz, now embark on a Joe Ingles-less stretch, which, as we're showing, the reason the Jazz didn't move Joe is because he was wildly important and was the glue. Today's show is brought to you by Murdoch Hyundai, located at 4646 South State Street, also located in Logan and in Linden. The Murdoch family, good people. I was talking to Tim Lacombe the other day. He's known Blake forever. Just really good people. And one of the signs where they're saying that, the most shows it is we're not going to take advantage of this current status and charge you more than MSRP. So instead, at Murdoch Hyundai, both in Linden and Logan and at 4646 South State Street, you'll get MSRP. You won't be charged over. Most of those cars are sold by the time they get in the lot. I saw Blake at the Jazz game the other day. I was talking to him about it. So make sure you get ahead of the game. Email me at dlock09@gmail.com. We'll set you up with a VIP meeting with whichever location. You can go look at the cars and then get lined up to get one of them. There are more and more cars coming in from Hyundai. They're doing a great job with that. And it's all at Murdoch Hyundai. I've told you about the lineup, the SUV lineup, the little Kona I'm driving right now, the Santa Fe. We've bought 2 of them. The Sonata and the Elantra. The Elantra was the North American car of the year. Those are your sedans. Go check it out. And every time I see a Palisade drive by me, I'm a little jealous, wishing I had one. It's all at Murdoch Hyundai at 4646 South State Street. Today's show is also brought to you by betonline.net. There might be less football being played, but betonline.net has way more odds and info for this playoff season, from scores, totals, players' performance, props, to where the next fired coach is going to land. BetOnline is the #1 spot for all things NFL betting in 2020. It's also not football. BetOnline.net's basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC coverage is the best in the business. From sports right down to your favorite Vegas casino games, BetOnline is your #1 online wagering destination. BetOnline, the fastest, easiest way to wager on all your sports and play your games. BetOnline, where the game starts. I got an interesting little, let me see the latest I got today from BetOnline. Give me one sec. Well, you don't have a choice but to give me one sec. Just don't leave is what I'm saying. Let's see. Where was the latest email I got? Here we go. Jimmy Garoppolo's next team, Steelers, is plus 400. Washington football team is plus 400. Bucks is plus 550. Dolphins next head coach, Jim Harbaugh, minus 200. Mike McDaniel plus 150. Kellen Moore plus 400. And then they also have next Supreme Court justice is what they're looking at as well. So there, a lot of fun stuff over at betonline.net. All right, so where do the Jazz go from here? We just outlined how that maybe, it's going to be hard. That obviously Joe had a vital key cog. First, you could really decide that Joe's the glue. And that if Joe's the glue, you're making massive roster changes as if you possibly can here at the All-Star, at the trade deadline. 10 days. If you don't have Joe and Joe's not a part of it, and you suddenly look at your roster and you're like, you know what, we actually have to go get, and we're going to form a different team. We're not going to play the same way with the same personnel. We're gonna trust Quinn Snyder, and we're gonna rebuild this thing on the fly with massive moves. That seems very difficult. We don't have a lot of draft picks. Joe's are really only expiring contracts. We have a lot of long contracts, or at least multiple year contracts rather than long, but multiple years becoming long. So that's not easy. The second one is you just try to move Joe's contract at this point. Like no matter what, you kind of move Joe's contract. He's not going to play. It's just a piece. And you can do that in one of two ways. One is you try to get some sort of player back. Somebody wants off of a deal. You decide you're willing to take it. And the third one is you actually just decide to get under the tax. Now, Oklahoma City is the spot for this. This is the way Oklahoma City set themselves up. They're short. They don't have enough money, actually. They need contracts, but they're going to make you pay. If they're going to take Joe Ingles' $11 million contract and save you somewhere in the range of probably, if the Jazz traded Joe Ingles' contract, got under the tax, probably save them in the range of $25 million if I have my math right. And I don't know that we'd get all the way under the tax, so it'd probably save us a little less. But if you're going to do that, it's probably going to cost you a future first, or at least a few seconds. It's going to cost you. Or it might cost you Jared Butler or Elijah Hughes if Oklahoma City thinks those are players that they're interested in, that they want to hear. So that one's really reasonable to me, honestly. I know it's no fun as a fan, but I do feel like, particularly as we are, we don't know what we're going to be like. We still have the key pieces to be a contender, but I'm not sure that if I'm the owner, I want to be paying $30 million in tax. Last time I checked, and I'm not great at all this stuff, it's gotten so complicated. But I believe we're $14.6 million over the tax line. So if you were to trade Joe Ingles and Elijah Hughes at Fort, you would be right on the apron of the tax line. You probably could then cut someone or do something to get something there. So, if you trade Joe Ingles and Elijah Hughes to Oklahoma City, you're under the tax line. It probably costs you a pick in the process. So that's a difficult one to swallow from a fan, but I think it's not a crazy concept. So those are the options of where we go. So yesterday I tweeted and said, hey, let's turn this into a Joe Ingles appreciation. And really, I don't know that Joe will see it, but hopefully. Well, little did I expect that I would have 500. The last check I had 534 responses. I thought maybe we would do a segment just running through some of them. Stacy Romney wrote, it's hard to pick just one, but this is a classic Joe Ingles moment with the headband. It gives you Joe's witty sarcasm, his three-point shooting, his sweet assists, his epic trash talk, and even more for making Utah your home along with Renee and the kids. Brian Chambers writes, my favorite Joe Ingles moment can't be summed up with a singular event. The guy is fun, easygoing, lovable, dedicated member of my favorite pro team. He makes everyone smile all the time, except opposing players, and he's a great dad, wishing him the best. Ray writes, giving Jordan Clarkson his six-man trophy, headband Joe, all the community engagement, legendary season last year, all the smack talk and stare downs, just the best. The best stare down is DeAndre Jordan, right? In the corner, hits the three and then actually kind of walks back in front of him. Jessica says, the Joe Ingles show, I set my alarm so I never miss it. So lucky we have a player that invested in our community for so many years. Who didn't need to be. The show makes my week. Dust wrote, he's been my favorite since he put on a Jazz jersey. Only met him once, and he laughed when I asked him if he was saying who opened their lunch was on Australian slang for who farted. He's simple, which is very hard to be these days. A great example of an amazing player. Austin Clayton goes on the floor. We'll never forget the playoff series against OKC where he locked up PG and headband Joe against the Grizzlies, wishing Joe a speedy recovery. Regardless of what's next for him, he'll always be loved. Keith Sorensen, headband Joe will never not be a thing. Well, of course. Thank you, Joe, for all you've done for Jazz fans. You've been energetic, feisty, positive, bigger than basketball, a hell of a player. Wishing you the best and fastest recovery in 30-plus years. You're my favorite Jazz man. Dan Met says, my son-in-law once asked me if I ever wanted a real NBA jersey, which one I would wear. Without hesitation, I said Joe Ingles, the patron saint of tall, slow, white guys who like to pick it up from and jack it from three. Get well soon. J Note DNA says too many. One was when he signed his big extension and said, I'll be giving most of this away because it's way too much money for one man deserves and needs. Obviously the OK series. And last season, Fox challenged Joe and Joe made him take note. Joe blowing kisses, talking smacks, hitting threes, mixing it up from Jeff. Mike, let's see. The Groovesy says Joe is the man. He brought a special energy and spirit to the state. I enjoy watching him develop into a bona fide starter and leader of this team. Wearing his jersey is an honor. Mike Cannon writes, apart from jingling from deep more than any jazz man ever, carrying the Aussie sledding tradition to the NBA, doing so much for autism awareness, winning Olympic, and being a truly amazing human. It's a great picture of him with a bunch of Australians. I think the autism one gets mentioned time and time again. I want to make sure it gets mentioned enough here. From Owl the Geek, his help in raising awareness for autism will always hold a special place in my heart. His performance against the Thunder in the playoffs a few years ago. These are the two that stood out to me other than the obvious headband Joe moment. Johnny writes, we sat behind Renee at Vivint, Joe's first year. Our son, who later learned was on the autism spectrum, kept kicking Renee's seat. I'm sure it bothered her, but she was patient and kind. And now she and Joe are the champions in that spectrum. That one got me when I read it yesterday. There's 500 of these. We will not read all of them. We will end with this one. Donovan Mitchell, you might have heard of him. The moment I came into training camp, my rookie year, thinking he was just an old dude and he kicked my ass. And I was thinking, how the hell is this old ass dude killing me like this? A lot of players jumped out. George Niang, Ricky Rubio with a very touching moment. There's another one here actually that I retweeted that was I actually wanted to end with Donovan, but just remembered I wanted to get this one in. A kid named David wrote, Joe, I'm pulling an all-nighter because I forgot to write a paper. Tell me I'm dumb and stop doing it. And Joe wrote, I mean, I wouldn't do it, but if you need to get the paper done, get it done and put 3 coffees. David wrote yesterday, I was actually going through a pretty rough patch around this time, and this tweet from Joe made my whole day and week so much better. What an awesome guy for taking the time to do the little things for the fans. Joe Ingles appreciation thread. We'll actually dig back into the trade stuff, look at Dallas, Denver, and Golden State as we continue on Locked On. Feels really hollow to do that next, doesn't it? But we're still playing Wednesday, and he's not, Joe's basketball career with Utah is on life support, shall we say. He's fine. We will still have Joe around, I'm sure, in some capacity. He's not one to totally go disappear. He may go to Melbourne a lot, but he's not one to disappear. That would be my take on Joe. Thanks very much for making Locked On Jazz our first listen of the day. Remember, Locked On Now is a great recap of all the things NBA. We also will have an NBA trade deadline show coming up for you, hosted by Josh Lloyd, John Corrales, and the crew. That is coming up for you for 2 hours on trade deadline day at Locked On NBA YouTube. People think unusual circumstances mean complicated taxes, but TurboTax Live experts, that makes things very easy and interesting. We all have unique lives, whether you've invested in crypto for the first time, own an up-and-coming small business, raising rambunctious twins, whatever it might be. TurboTax Live has experts that answer your tax questions, walk you through the whole process, do your taxes from start to finish. They help you with every decision you deserve, with every dedication you deserve, no matter your unique situation. And you can talk to a TurboTax Live expert through your phone or computer without leaving your house. TurboTax Live experts are here to help you however you need. And if you need an extra hand your taxes off to them. They'll do it for you. To TurboTax Live, an interesting life can mean an even greater refund. Visit TurboTax.com. You do your thing. They got your taxes in. It is Intuit's TurboTax Live. Check it all out at TurboTaxLive.com. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends at Rock Auto. With ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to keep all the parts you need. So why endure pointless, seemingly intimidating questions and wait while the person behind the counter orders parts and looks around and can't find anything? Save time and money while using Rock Auto. You can spend 30, 50, 100% more if you want, or you can just go to rockauto.com. It's a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you could need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Go to rockauto.com. Make sure you write Locked On in the How'd You Hear About Us section. It's rockauto.com on the How Did You Hear About Us section on rockauto.com. All right, let's do the trade game. Said we were going to do this. We didn't know it was coming ahead of us. We'll stay with the plan. Ricky Rubio, by the way, if you can find that tweet, I'm not going to get it right. It's pretty interesting. Like, basically said, like, you know, the road to success is taking the hand that was given to you and then pretending you wanted it. So that was a pretty deep and insightful comment. Rubio's great. I mean, by the way, most people have access to Joe, but I do have a few texts from people around the league who I'm friends with who've like tweeted to me and said, hey, could you please make sure that you reach out to Joe and give him my best. So it's definitely moved. All right, Dallas is super interesting at the trade deadline because of two players. Dorian Finney-Smith is at one contract expires. He's $4 million, and Jalen Brunson, who's been brilliant for them, is a 1 year, $1.8 million. Dallas is $15 million over the tax. Kristaps has 3 years left. Tim Hardaway, who's probably out for the year, has 4 years left. Dwight Powell has a year left. Reggie Bullock has 3 years left. Maxi Kleber has 2 years left. They're Bojan has 2, or Boban has 2. Trey Burke has, so they're not getting out from under the tax anytime here. And so the problem they have is when Dorian Finney-Smith becomes a free agent or Jalen Brunson becomes a free agent, Dallas doesn't have a great way to pay him. So what Dallas probably needs to do at the trade deadline is either couple one of these deals, like a Dwight Powell, $11 million with Dorian Finney-Smith, and try to get back a $15 million player if they want that. Probably keeps them over the tax. But, the real problem they have is not so much the tax. It's that they can't re-sign Dorian Finney-Smith or Jalen Brunson when somebody else gives them a pretty good offer. They're gonna have a hard time keeping those guys. So you could see Brunson and Powell get put together in a deal, and then they bring back a $12 million player or something of that sort. Or you could see Finney-Smith in some sort of a deal where they probably wouldn't mind a player who's got an extra year or two left, because at least then they have that player and they don't lose them in free agency. So those are two interesting names. Maxi Kleber's terrific. I don't think that they're in a financial bind in a manner in which they're willing to trade him. Powell has not been quite as good, so that could be a possibility. I don't know how it fits us, but Finney-Smith is obviously interesting as a defensive wing. I don't know that we could re-sign him. And Brunson is another ball handler, future point guard. Really been great this year. So in that sense, Dallas is an really interesting team to watch at the trade deadline, also because they're good, right? So, the other aspect of Dallas is when you look at them, is they're a top 6 team right now. They're sitting at 6, the 29-22, just a game behind us, trying to work their way to home court while dealing with the fact that they have this kind of restriction. Another team that's hot right now is Denver. Their schedule's gotten super easy. Jokic would have won the MVP if you'd flipped their schedule, because their schedule is really, really easy right now. And so they're going to roll here for a while. It was really, really hard to start the year. And they have a bunch of not very good teams late in the season who have now looked in the mirror and know they're not very good, to use a Locked On Nuggets host Matt Morris term. They're interesting. Again, they're right on the cap line. They've already made one move this year to try to deal with it a little bit. They're not going to move Jokic. Jamal Murray, no. Will Barton, 2-year, $15 million deal. I don't think they're pretty good, right? And they're waiting to see what happens when Murray comes back. Jeff Green's got a 2-year deal. Porter's, they just did a disability exception on him, so he's done for the year. There's just not hard for us to go trade them, and not a lot of pieces here that I think you'd be interested in making a move for. I love Zeke Njai. I don't think they're about to move him. I think he could be really good. He just moves. He moves interestingly and has a set of skills. And they've already made the trade for Forbes. They got off from under PJ Dozier. So I don't see a lot of possibilities for us here with Denver. And I don't see they'll probably do something. I mean, they might do something just to get under that 1.9 million. Golden State, this is actually what gets super interesting, by the way, in regards to the Jazz trade. This is where I think these teams are most interesting for the Jazz. And we'll get into it tomorrow as well when we look at Houston, LA, and LA. So here's Dallas, who's a real contender that might look to get better. And they've got a cap problem to deal with Dorian Finney-Smith and Jalen Brunson, and maybe, but that's not the script by which they make a massive move. Denver has already given up a bunch of picks in the Orlando deal for Aaron Gordon, and they're $1 million over the cap. That's not a team that's about to go make a bunch of moves. Golden State, who has super interesting pieces, is $39 million over the tax. $39 million over the tax line. So they have these pieces. Wiseman at $9 million, Moody at $3 million, Kuminga at $5 million. Like they could start playing around with that and another contract, though they don't have the next contract to go get a Ben Simmons or something major, or Dame Lillard, which I don't think they would want with both Clay and Steph. But they can do something here. If they're willing to move a Wiseman or Kuminga or Moody, which is their future pieces, they can go bring in another piece and solidify themselves as a championship team. And that makes, from their standpoint, makes them an interesting trade player. On the other end, they don't want to be adding salary because they're $40 million over the tax. And this is a reoccurring theme that's going on in the Western Conference with title contenders, is that these teams don't actually, a lot of the teams that are there, you might make an offer to someone for David Locke, and the team's going to say, yeah, well, we like David Locke. Well, they're probably not going to say that, but we like David Locke. We don't want to do that unless we get this. Well, if they're not going to get that. I don't think it's going to be a robust trade market for teams. And so when they don't get that, then do they come back and take what seems like a mundane deal just to at least get something for that player? And so I think that's something to really watch. I'm not sure it's a robust trade market in that sense. And then it's always good to have our happy fans on. Trade everyone, no matter who's on the team. There's no fire or fight. That's great. So we have those. That's great. That'd be a good approach. That'd be a good idea to just trade everyone on a roster that won 52 games last year. But it's a different roster now, right? And it is, without Joe, we just documented it's going to be really different, and it'll be curious if we change the whole rotation. How much was Joe Ingles really the glue that made everything churn, even when he wasn't playing as well this year as he has been in the past? We'll check it out. Or on the other end, I don't mean this rudely to Joe. Maybe the optimism is bringing in Daniel House. He plays with more juice. He plays with a little bit more athleticism. He's not nearly as good, but Joe was shooting 30% from the field and 20% from three in the last month. He comes with a kind of an added zest to it, and maybe it actually picks the group up a little bit more, right? If you look back at us in the last few years, we've always needed that kind of tough day, where there was the trade of Dante Exum or the releasing of Jeff Green, or which happened on the same day, or the trade of Alec Burks. We've always needed that moment that kind of spurs us on to the next thing. Maybe the unfortunate thing is that this actually spurs us on, changes us up, puts us on our toes a little bit about what everything is. All right, have a great one. This is Locked on Jazz. Tomorrow we'll look at Houston, which does include the Eric Gordon possibilities. The Clippers and Lakers, maybe not for prospects for us, but let's see how tight they are with trades. Trade deadline is the 10th, and we'll try to wrap this up. If you look at it, we will look at Memphis, Minnesota, and New Orleans on Thursday show, Oklahoma City, Phoenix, and Portland on Friday's show. Maybe we'll slide in Sacramento and San Antonio's there as well to wrap up this week as we head into next week and the trade deadline week of everything. All right, this is Locked on Jazz. Thanks very much for making us your first listen of the day. Right now, go listen to Locked on Now at Locked on NBA on YouTube, or Locked on Now on your podcast